right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming to our bond information meeting here at Bloomfield Hills Middle School. My name is Brian Goby. I'm the Director of Physical Plant Services. I've lived in the district for about 13 years, worked here for 13 years. My kids have gone to Eastover, East Hills, 9th grade campus, main campus, and the new high school, which is now operating in its 5th year.
And I'm David Shulkin, Director of Technology, Information Services. I also live in the district. I'm on the west side. I'm near West Hills and Lone Pine. I have 2 girls here at this building, and they're little 5th graders, or big 5th graders as it is now. So, but we were in Kona today, and I do kind of wish I could keep hugging them and not let them grow any bigger, but it's not going to happen. And I've lived in the district now for I think it's 5 years now.
So if you remember back to when we had the high school discussions years ago, merging Andover and Lasser High School into Bloomfield Hills High School, that was our last bond that the district passed. And at that time, Dr. Glass, our superintendent, said he would take about a 4-year break before we looked at our K-8 facilities after that project was complete. So now we're in our 5th year of high school at the new high school. And Dave and I went back about a 1.5 years ago, and we started to update our facility assessments and our technology assessments. So we were able to present to the board about 1 year ago that we had about $33 million in critical needs in our K-8 facilities, and that we had some options at that time. We could kind of manage the decline with the sinking fund monies that we have, or we could go out and try to find $33 million and take care of those critical needs and remain who we are in the configuration that we're in. And we would have buildings that were built in the 50s and 60s that would have new boilers, have new systems, but would still be in an old school configuration. Or we could explore something that was new and different and kind of reinvent the school district, and that could cost up to $200 million. And the school board at that time asked us to explore that. So we formed some groups. We had a scope and design committee. We had, what was the community members on the outside?
So we had, we had focus groups, our master property planning that we had done, obviously our strategic plan. One of the big pieces that kind of got us rocketing in this area was the Moonshot group that provided a lot of insight and kind of design and thought and what our programs could look like at the middle school. And they were just focused at the middle school at the time. So that was a big piece of it. And then of course the scope and design that Brian was a big part of and leading with a variety of other people as well, learning services.
So the scope and design group got together and looked at all sorts of configurations, and we explored different options. And in the end, the scope and design group came up with a 2 middle school result for the district, which would put 2 middle schools at 6th through 8th grade, one at the old Lasser site, which would be like a North Middle School, and one at the southern site, which is here at Bloomfield Hills Middle School, and then 4 K-5 elementary schools across the district, Lone Pine moving into West Hills, Conant remaining where it is with an addition and renovations, Way remaining where it is with additions and renovations, and Eastover moving into East Hills. Of course, those buildings get additions and renovations too. Our focus was on safety and security and getting secure front entrances in our buildings, better parking situations, better egress and access, bus loops, window film systems, video systems, upgrading all of our technology infrastructure, technology devices, and the list goes on and on.
That's okay. So one of the things that we wanted to share with all of you is kind of the timeline, because that's the one big thing, right? Hey, we know we're getting an idea of how much this is going to cost us as taxpayers, what it means in terms of our investment as a community, but we also want to see what the timeline looks. How's this going to affect me as a family, or my kids, or just my neighbors, and as it were. So in fall 2020, because we're going to be consolidating down to 2 middle schools, we need to look at a little bit of our attendance boundaries. We're unbalanced right now currently in the district, and we need to look at that and see what scenarios we can kind of work through, and what might make the most sense in terms of trying to balance those population numbers. So we will, in the fall of 2020, this committee will start, and it'll be just like we've done with scope and design. We'll have community members, administrators, teachers, all of us stakeholders will have a voice in this, and so we'll look at this challenge that we have for the district and come up with some recommendations.
And by the fall of 23, we can be in our new configuration where Eastover has moved into East Hills, Lone Pine has moved into West Hills. Conant and Way have the new classroom additions built, and of course, North is open and South is open. The pool would not be complete yet at North. The larger multi-purpose spaces at Conant and Way would not be complete yet. The expanded preschool would not be complete at Conant, but Lone Pine could still be open. And then that following year, and of course work is going on in the wintertime on the outside of the buildings and the summertime on the inside of the buildings. Some people have a hard time understanding how can construction be going on while school's in session. We've done this many times where we work around students. We don't have electricians in classrooms, you know, hanging lights while a class is in session. They're doing work outside. We're doing site work. We're doing underground work. We're doing, you know, storm or sanitary work. And then the fall of '24, Eastover would have been empty for a full year now. We've been in there for a year turning Eastover into a preschool. In the fall of '24, Eastover opens as a preschool and Fox Hills would close. And then the fall of '26, all work is completed, which would include many upgrades to the farm, the nature center, Wing Lake facility, Booth, Doyle, and the rest of our buildings. It'll all wrap up the fall of '26.
So what does kind of the scope of this, what does it include, and what did we, kind of the buckets that we looked at? Safety, of course, is a big one. I'm going to say for probably, I'm going to make an assumption here, for all of us here, we went to school at a much different time in terms of safety and security. And when we talk about safety, we're not just talking about just entrance into a building and surveillance cameras, we're also talking about how we design those bus loops. How do parents, vehicles, children, our staff all kind of integrate or intersect with those kinds of moving parts? How do we see fields of view outside from offices or other spaces? How do we communicate outside during recess? So these minor things that we may or may not take for granted, we want to make sure that we're smartly building and designing buildings that kind of encompass all of those types of needs or the typical types of things. So obviously we've got sprinkler systems, and Brian, you can talk to this because this is a very important thing a lot of people don't understand about being able to look at a building like this, which is much older, right? Mm-hmm. And if you sprinkle it, you have some other opportunities. Do you mind? Right,
so new construction, it's a mandate that you sprinkle a building. You put in a fire suppression system that is, you know, is hydro, it's liquid. And it allows you to take away firewalls and barriers that our current facilities are built with. So in a space like this, you know, we have a smoke or fire rated wall system that we can't open up because it's not a non-sprinkled building. So in all of our buildings, all of them will be completely sprinkled with this bond program, which allows us, I mean, one, is safer, right, because the building's sprinkled, but two, it allows you to change instructional spaces and open up walls and make more collaborative learning areas.
Because that's one of the challenges, right? You still got the same square walls in these classrooms, so how do you take advantage of it? And this is one of those ways to start exploring some of those opportunities. So when you think about these are just some of the general things. But obviously, in any of our classrooms, the things that we highly covet, particularly in our district, is flexibility. Being able to not have just a front of the classroom, but every piece of the classroom being part of the educational experience. So we're going to be looking at those interactive displays. By the way, the ones that we have now, 2005 we installed them. Their life cycle is about 7 to 9 years. I'm not a good math guy, but I know it's more than 7 to 9 years. We haven't been able to get parts for 2 years. The things aren't in great shape. I can barely read them, and I need glasses, and that doesn't even help. We're going to look at updating architectural components as you come in, not only glass, but, so Brian, like, what's a great example of what we might see in terms of, we're going to have some new entranceways, but what other architectural things we might see?
Well, one of the things we did many years ago was, as you walked in, you probably saw what we call the gateway space, which looks like that new area up by the front doors. And that has technology, that has carpeting, it has flexible seating. It's a way to collaborate. And we put gateway spaces at all three of our all three of our middle schools at that time. And that was really the gateway into the high school. And some would argue a gateway into the new learning and new collaborative spaces that we'll be working with here. So almost like a prototype before the high school, then we learned from the high school, and now we're able to take it district-wide.
Of course, lighting. We're going to be moving to LED lighting. And this will improve just all over. And we'll be looking at how do you right now it's all like standardized lighting, right? You turn them on and off. Some of us get up and unscrew a bulb here so we can have a little bit more dim or a little bit more mood lighting. So we'll have other opportunities in different spaces to take advantage of that. And of course, media centers and those types of things. Another big one is many of our spaces aren't as ADA compliant or even just accessible for many of us who might be challenged or in a walker or a wheelchair. And so how do we work, or how do we build an intelligent building design that will support all of our students and staff and community members? We're going to have those sensory rooms and therapy rooms, which as I'm understanding is very unique. Not a lot of school districts have this, even in the entire country. And of course, all of this will help us preserve our programs. As we know, and we have here, we can't even do the entire orchestra and band together, right? We have to separate them out. And we're having different band concerts to help for that. But in other parts of the district, we don't have enough people to barely do an orchestra or band. And so this will help combine and save and preserve those programs that we value a lot. I think the other big one is our community. So as you know, as you live here, we don't have parks. We're the Parks and Rec for the entire community. And so we want to build and utilize our spaces to have our communities be part of that, to come in. So we look at our green spaces, our nature center, our farm, those things will be strategically built out, expanded, programs developed, both for community as well as for our educational students.
And the big thing with those spaces is the ADA accessibility and the ability to walk around those spaces and use the pathways and access different components at the farm that you really can't get to now.
Has anybody ever been to Lone Pine to sled during the, but you know, if you're students, if you're during recess, that's a big hill to go down. And if you're in a wheelchair, there's no chance, right? And so we want to reduce all of those barriers for all of our students and staff and community members as best that we possibly can. So one of the things that often comes up, and we'll get these kind of questions like, well, who's decided all this? Who's been a part of this? And it's very important to understand that this has been a community-involved process. And it didn't just start yesterday. We've been at this for a while. We've been talking about this. We've been exploring these things. It's very rarely a month goes by that we're not talking about what we need to do to improve our facilities, to keep our programs running. And these are just a good sense of what we've been doing in terms of grabbing that stakeholder voice. I'm gonna let.
Do you want me to say?
Yeah, do you mind, Tina?
So I'm Tina Kostick. I've been with the district since 2011, and I'm back to wearing one hat. I was talking with some of you earlier. Pat is wonderful. He is trying to do as many of these as possible, but sometimes there's a conflict, so it takes three of us to fill his shoes. On this, we have two slides that are financial. So on this slide, we are looking at the tax rates for bond debt and sinking fund debt in the county for every school district. On the left side, all of the districts are listed. We are actually the lowest for that's capital related debt. So bonded debt, right now, all that we have outstanding is the high school. And then we also have our sinking fund that was approved by voters. That'll be through December of 23. So the red represents us at the bottom. If everything, that was in 2019, if all the rates remain the same this year, and there are some districts that also have proposals, some with no increase because they already are levying and they're just taking advantage of issuing more, but some may go up. But if all their rates stay the same and then we add what we're proposing, we're in the red and we're fifth from the bottom in 2020.
And Tina, we're also hearing that Farmington and Pontiac are going out for bond currently.
They are.
And so we may even come out lower or stay roughly in that same area.
One of them would be increased and would actually bring us down lower. I think one is not an increase, depending on which one. I don't have them.
I think maybe Farmington's not.
Farmington might not be. I think Pontiac is an increase. And so then on this slide, we do have a tax calculator on the website. And I would encourage you to navigate to that, and you can put the taxable value of your home. Taxable value, the easiest way to say it is, oh, it's about half of the market value. But when I get to explain it, I like to say if you've been in your home a long time, especially when all of the property tax values dropped, the amount that taxable value can go up every year, and that is the dollar amount that millage rates are multiplied by to get to your taxes, is capped. and it's capped by inflation. So what happens when people are in their home a long time, especially coming out of that recession, is the actual value of your home, if you were to go to sell it, is much higher than the taxable value. So just keep that in mind as you're talking with folks. It's easy to say about half, but I've already talked to some people that have been looking at their bill, and they're pointing out to me that their value of their home is much higher because taxable value has been capped, and so that's what they're using to calculate the impact.
And so it's a 1.85 mils increase.
Yep, 1.85 increase. So if the taxable value is $100,000, there's $185. Mathematically, that all works. So that is about $185 for every 100,000. But that tax calculator will give it to you based on the municipality you're in too. It's very specific.
Okay.
You have a question?
I was just going to ask if that slide was on the website or if I could take a picture of it.
Oh,
you absolutely
Okay.
can take a picture.
All right.
Yes. And I think the slide deck is on the website.
I believe that I'm hesitant to say because I haven't looked at it. So
No, I know. We keep populating more and more. I'm looking.
Yeah. I can't keep up, to be frank with you. It's flying.
So,
But the calculator is there.
okay. Is it okay to ask a question?
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
So,
This is it.
and I don't, we're newer to the district,
Mm-hmm.
so we came in for 1 year at Way, and now my daughter's here. How many elementary schools are there now?
4.
There are 4, so there will still be 4.
Correct.
But but some of the locations, so you're basically reusing all your locations. You're not looking at selling property, or you are?
So let me make sure you tell me if I'm answering your question
Sure.
correctly. So we will continue to have 4 elementary schools.
Right.
Some of the locations of those 4 elementaries will change.
Yep.
And what we really focused on is repurposing and utilizing the assets we have.
Okay.
Rather than tearing everything down and building new.
Sure.
That we are really looking to preserve every asset. So by taking some of the middle schools, and Brian speaks about this off the top of his head, and actually having them be elementary, since we are going down to 2 middle schools and using the North Losser property for one of them, that allows us to take the 2 remaining middle schools and have them be the elementaries.
So with the elementaries that are going away, which I think are Lone Pine and Eastover,
The existing building for the current Lone Pine, yes.
will be, so they'll both become preschools.
Actually, Lone Pine would no longer be an elementary school, and the preschool would be at Conant.
Correct.
Got it.
Okay, and then the Eastover Elementary School, as it stands today,
Yeah.
would actually move to the East Hills Middle School site,
Okay.
and the Eastover, as it stands today, would become a preschool site instead of Fox Hills.
So that leaves Lone Pine and Fox Hills vacant.
Got it.
Thank you.
So those properties will be sold?
Those buildings most likely will be demolished,
Okay.
and the board hasn't determined yet what they would do with those properties.
So I guess I'm wondering if, when you factored in the bond that you're going after, clearly the property is worth money. So is that being taken into consideration? And I understand you're saying, well, they don't know what they're going to do with it, but if those properties would bring in dollars, wouldn't that potentially lower the bond?
It certainly could, but the sale of the properties is not being factored in the bond.
Okay.
And, we don't have current appraisals on those properties, but we did sell 2 properties not too long ago.
We did. So over the past few years, one of the items that was up on the slide is a master property planning process. That's what we called it.
Okay.
And that is when we found ourselves with the high school being up and running, and we did have excess properties to review. So at that point in time, we brought in community members, parents, administrators, and we went through what seemed like 2 to 3 years of a process, actually, even engaging professionals to figure out which properties are we going to sell, if any, and then which ones are we going to keep. And it was a discussion over a very long period of time. And so frankly, I'll go out on a limb, and I'd envision the board contemplating and considering doing that exact same thing again for any excess properties. It's not just something that we can take an appraisal and start to plan a sale and have the proceeds.
Sure.
Part of going for a bond too is going for a bond produces the money up front, so we can immediately jump into the projects.
Got it.
And so the sale is a pending decision by our board in the future, like Brian said.
I think it's also, just to, and both of them said it, but I just wanted to reiterate it, we are literally leveraging every piece of our properties and assets. And I think moreover, this bond is an investment. So when we think about this, we're not paying, but we can't pay bills. We can't use this for operating costs. This is strictly to invest in our properties and our assets to make it better, both for our community as well as our staff and students. And so I think that's a big takeaway. And we know that there's other people who are going for other bonds or even millage here in the township. This is an investment. We're not paying bills with this.
And then I would add to that, as was pointed out in the graph, the timeline expects all of the students to be in the buildings, in the classrooms. They will be in 2023, in the fall, when school starts. The rest of the construction will take place and be finished in 2026. And then at some point, depending on what happens with the properties, a key piece of that question, buildings demolished, that is likely, we feel comfortable saying that, the green space comment. So our board may decide we do need more green space. Our schools are our parks. We hear that all the time. So I don't want anyone to walk away thinking that it would be sold, but it'll be all part of the decision.
As well as paying attention to enrollment trends, if we had to do something different. One thing I didn't mention in Bloomfield Hills Middle School North, we're proposing to build 3 academic wings for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And those would be constructed so a second story could be added at a later date. So if you grew in population and you needed more middle school space, you could put on those second floors. If you shrunk in population and you wanted to consolidate to 1, but 1 wasn't quite big enough, you could put additions onto that at that time too. And that's just thinking way down the road.
Do you guys have any, I feel like I'm hogging.
No, please.
I'm so sorry. So when and I agree with you, total investment, and people in our community take a lot of pride in our schools, and like I told you, that's why we moved here. After the high school opened, were there any studies or anything that was done that showed, yes, this is an investment, and here's how it affected home rates in the district compared to other nearby? I don't know. I'm not a finance person, and I don't know if that's an unrealistic question, but I'm just trying to understand, when we talk about investment, I look at it as, okay, it's an investment not just for my children. Well, actually, my daughter will probably be out by then, but if I look at someday when my kids have to move me to a senior home. Hopefully not. Hopefully they'll take me in. But what does that? What is the potential that could do for my property? Is there any?
So overall, just the overall data, we hear all the time that investing in our schools also has a correlation to property values. But I also, just being a numbers person, the economy certainly has a big part to do with it, in the state. There are things outside of our control. So to directly answer your question, there isn't anything specific that I know of that we have to say since the high school opened. But a data point that I happen to provide, because enrollment and the state determined foundation is our primary source of operating funds, the enrollment trend that I show actually declined when we were 1 high school on 2 campuses. And then since the point that the high school opened in the fall of 15, our enrollment has increased. And it's a data point, but scientifically I can't prove it was a direct correlation.
Sure.
But I like to think it had some impact.
Right.
I can anecdotally.
Sure.
So I lived in Farmington with my wife, right?
Okay.
And so when we opened the new high school, when we were building it, I'm like, okay, I can see the vision here. This is real. And so my wife and I talked, and that's why we moved into the district.
Okay.
So that was a big factor for us. And we had seen that go on for a long time to get to this point to build that high school. So for us, anecdotally, we moved in because of it.
And for me personally, I moved here because of the job. I wanted to be in the district, and I wanted my kids to go in the district that I was working in, so I could speak from the heart and live what I was doing. But you will hear from people that shop around, and Novi and Northville and Troy and Rochester have passed bonds, and their buildings are nicer looking. They offer more from a facility standpoint. So like me as the facility director, I want to at least keep up and improve with what we can. Both of my kids going through the high school and their comments, and some of their friends coming to visit them at our high school from even some of these other communities I just mentioned, they were just blown away.
Yeah, it's a beautiful school.
You know, my son went on a tour at University of Michigan, and his comment was, wow, this looks like my high school. I mean, if that isn't preparing our kids for what they're going to be going to next, I don't know what is that. That was
Yeah. You're on a roll, keep going.
I don't know if I have any other questions.
Well,
All right, I'm going to ask a dumb question because I am not the finance person in my house. A bond is not like a special assessment. So with a bond, it's an annual tax on your taxable property. But if my job moved me somewhere else, I wouldn't be responsible for the bond once I sold the property, right?
No, and no question's a dumb question.
Okay,
Actually,
right,
I think
that's what
many-
you're
I've
supposed
heard
to
that
say in
before.
school.
Yeah.
Many people wonder that.
Yeah.
Yeah, think of a bond like a mortgage. And basically, when voters do approve a bond, voters or residents are actually approving or authorizing the district to assess a millage every year to pay back the principal and interest on that bond. And a bond is actually something that is sold at market to investors. And some of you, if you have mutual funds, you likely have some form of local government and school bonds in there. That's how the money is raised, and that's then what we use for projects. And then every year, we actually look at, and we're only allowed to levy enough to cover the principal and interest with very little cushion. So it's not like we can all of a sudden assess you twice as much and just hog the money and earn interest. That's not allowed.
Okay.
Treasury watches that very closely, and so does our annual audit.
I saw that it said something about with the pool, it said community pool. Does that mean the pool, when it wasn't school hours, it would be open to the community?
so the pool would be designed to have its own separate entrance. So during daytime hours, when school is in session, it could be used by the community. And then after hours, when it wasn't being used by middle school, or if there was any high school, usage, it'd be used by the community.
Oh, wow.
But it gives us an opportunity to keep it at a warmer temperature than our competition high school pool, which,
It's not warm.
they can be very cold.
Okay.
Yes?
When was the last time the district passed a bond for K through 8 school buildings?
That's an excellent question. We love our history. So we actually had to go back. There was about 20 million in total. There were 4 different small bond measures on a ballot in the late 90s. And you know what those were for. Some of it was tech, and then some of it was maybe
The fine arts wing.
fine arts wings. So that was in the late 90s. And then before that, we have to go to the 60s before we saw anything passed related to that. And we have that history too that some people have asked for. So it's the high school was the most recent, and obviously it's not K-8, but that was May of 2012.
What happens if we don't pass the bond?
So if we don't pass the bond, we've talked about that, especially from facilities, so I'm going to look at Brian.
So from a facility standpoint, these critical needs are not going to go away, and you can see some of it in our parking lots. Some of it you can't see in our boilers and our roofs and some of our infrastructure. So either another bond attempt has to be made, or program cuts have to be made, or we use the little bit of money we've gotten from the sale of properties, which I know it sounds like you sold these properties. Where's all that money?
So that money is, you can only sell properties once, in case you didn't think about that.
Yeah.
So we can only spend the money once, so we actually set it aside for future capital needs. And that would be something I would contemplate, recommending to be used first, of course, before we touched anything with programs. And right now, there's almost $5 million in there, but there's $2 more million coming from those sales yet this school year. So that's what we have. I think that's a question on the website as well. And then other than that, and having the conversation of what to do next, tech is a big part of it as well, because you already heard Dave talk about the Promethean boards and what we might have to do.
And that little tech bond that was done in '97, I think that's correct, that did our wide area network and put wiring in some phones in the district. But as you know, keep in mind, we still had pagers then. Cell phones were there, but not, right? I mean, now we're all like here. Right. But that didn't exist then. And that is all aging. We can't use it. We can only use it for phones now. We can't use it for our normal network operations. The wide area network, which was fiber for the entire district, that is at its end of life as well. And so we have to do that work one way or the other, because we have to stay connected not only to the county, but just between our buildings, call 911, or even just look on the web. So it's a big impact to us. We have to take care of that. And those are part of that critical needs.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, thank you so
very
much.
It's a little chillier today, so thanks for coming.